So Robert Eggers' Nosferatu is very much what you'd expect from Robert Eggers for making a vampire film. So Eggers' filmography has been mostly about like historical horror films and really ingraining you in that era, with like films like The Witch and Northman and The Lighthouse, just like, fully immersing yourself in this historical horror. So there's a lot of, based on like his past films, which are phenomenal. So Nosferatu, big bar is set for this director to see how he can handle this adaptation of the classic German expressionist film. And he very much delivers. I'm sure it's no surprise here. Eggers, once again, proves that he knows how to direct horror here. And I think what makes his version of Nosferatu so compelling is that he finds the best way to make it feel like a nightmare at all times. There's a lot of his hallmarks here, like the way that he like transitions between scenes, the way that he focuses on people getting lost within their own heads, and just the psychological horror of it all. Like, so yeah, all the Eggers hallmarks, but I think just like the way that it proceeds here, like it feels like every scene is meant to evoke some level of dread and terror within the audience. It's very much how like a lot of people will tell you to write a horror screenplay, which is that at the end of like every like page or so, there should be something scary happening at all times to keep the audience interested and invested. And here it's like that throughout. And I think that it doesn't let up because the story is so immersive with the way that Eggers shoots it that you just love to get lost within it all. So like the story is Thomas Hutter, played by Nicholas Hoult, is going to visit Count Orlok, played by Bill Skarsgård, and it's pretty much like the same Dracula story. Like Orlok takes an interest in real estate, and then he moves to this new town, and then he starts attacking the populace and forming an interest here in Hutter's wife Ellen, played by Lily Rose Depp. And I have to give like a special commendation here, just because like Lily Rose Depp is surprisingly good here in the role of Ellen, just because like the film starts with her and it kind of ends with her mostly taking control of this story where she's like seduced by Dracula. In this case, Count Orlok, and the one to defeat the vampire in the end. And I think like she goes through the best arc just because like it feels like she's present throughout this narrative, and she goes through being initially compelled by Orlok in the very beginning of the film, like immediately from the first shot. Like they show before Thomas even meets Orlok has already seduced this woman, and there's like this grand like evil seduction going on immediately. So she's got a lot to fight against, and the way that she kind of like loses her mind and tries to maintain her sanity while everything is crumbling around her is just fantastic. And I say that because Depp is working with like some top talents here, like not just like Nicholas Hoult, who's fantastic, portraying like the fearfulness of Thomas Hutter, or Bill Skarsgård, who is very much playing up his role of Orlok. Like he's very much leaning into the operatics that Eggers has written into this film, but also a lot of other big names here, like Willem Dafoe as Professor Alban Eberhard von Franz. And he delivers very much what you'd expect. He's stressing, the importance of, recognizing that there are demons in this world and how to defeat them. So he speaks with a lot of passion, but also urgency, so that there's enough strength within his character where, even people who doubt him would start believing him, just with the way that he is looking straight into the abyss here and telling everybody, you have to take Orlok seriously. He is going to mess up your town. He's going to take your women. You have to take this seriously. And he does a great job playing off of Dr. Seaver, played by Ralph Ineson. And they have a pretty good dynamic, especially since they share most of the screen time together, and we only briefly get to see him more around on Thomas and Ellen, and it's mostly just them fighting for trying to them like having this fight over science and belief, and they have to learn to work together ultimately. And it's interesting to see that dynamic play up with like the way that with every scene, Defoe more and more convinces people that no, Orlok is a vampire, and this is how we've got to stop him. Now, Eggers' direction here makes everything seem like a trippy nightmare, and that goes for like every scene. Like one scene where I thought the film might get bogged down in the mechanics is the scene where Thomas Hutter is first going to visit Orlok. Now, there's a bit of a Thomas does have a bit of a nightmare in the village that he stops in before he goes to the castle, which is surreal enough, and I kind of expected that from Eggers. But the way that he approaches the castle, like the way that he's picked up by the carriage and arrives at the gates, it just like it seamlessly transitions, where it feels like, one moment he's in the woods and then the next moment he's like right at the gate, with just like the passing of shadows. And the way that it feels like he's going deeper and deeper into the castle with just these dark shadows and like the harsh coloring of like the contrasting blue and everything like that. It feels like, yeah, like you're going into some place very, very terrifying and not just like an old dusty castle. It does feel like you're going into the gates of hell. And what really helps evoke more of that atmosphere, I think, is like Eggers' smart choice to not reveal much of Orlok. Like he only reveals a little bit of him as the film goes on. Like you hear his voice, you see his shadow, and you see like his long fingernails in the beginning. And then as the film goes on, you progressively see more and more of him, including like even in a scene where Thomas like approaches Orlok when he like rises out of his grave completely naked, he's still in the shadows, and you don't see all of them. And then eventually, I can understand why they do this, because like when you eventually do see him in his full form, and I do mean you do see like Skarsgård's face and all that in his full vampire getup. It's not as impressive. Like it's not as much of a disappointment as something like Longlegs, where the marketing kept hiding Nicolas Cage, and then when you finally see him, it just looks like Nicolas Cage just like fell in a vat of flour. It's not as bad, but it's not that impressive, where you can understand why Eggers was leaning more on the lighting and kind of like the slow reveal. And I think that works, because by the time like you do get like the full form of seeing like all the makeup on Skarsgård's Orlok, it arrives at a scene where Skarsgård is already like delivering this powerful monologue about threatening Ellen, saying like, look, I'm starting the clock here, and I'm gonna come for your soul eventually. And the lines that he's given here, if they're not delivered with like just the right amount of like belief and sinisterness in that delivery, it could easily be comical. And especially for like the makeup that they use with Skarsgård, that scene could fall apart immediately. In fact, if you look closely, when you get to that part of the film, you look very closely at it, you could kind of see where this would go awry. But because of the way that Eggers shoots it and the way that Skarsgård just nails that performance, and he leans into the theatrics of it, like pretty much all the actors do here. Like worth noting here is like Aaron Taylor Johnson and Emma Corrin as another couple who get attacked by Orlok. They're pretty damn good, and I think like they sell it. They recognize that these lines are kind of like, they're very, you have to project them. You have to speak them as though you believe in them, and that they pack the emotion. Because if you don't, this could feel like a very stuffy historical horror film. And it very much doesn't, mainly because it does what Eggers does best with his horror films, which is lean into what's more interesting. So, it's, yeah, like, Orlok, attacking people and like sending like a plague of rats across the city, and all his transformations and stuff like that. That's pretty cool. But I love the way that Eggers leans more into the psychosexual angle of it, which has been present in pretty much all his films, and I expected it here. But I love the way that he just like lingers on these moments and kind of embraces a lot more of the sexuality that would come with like a vampire story. It's probably, even for as grotesque as it gets at the time, this is probably one of the hornier vampire films since the one from the 90s with the Bram Stoker's Dracula. Not just because there's quite a bit of sex in it. In fact, there's like some very aggressive sex and sacrificial sex in this film that directly plays into the narrative. Like you'll hear some people say like, oh, there's unnecessary sex scenes in here. The sex scenes are very much they're very necessary for this type of story. It does really showcase the dynamic between Thomas, Ellen, and Orlok, especially when like Thomas tries to save Ellen from Orlok's influence when she starts becoming more possessed, her body starts contorting, and then when you get to like the end of the picture, it's kind of like Ellen taking ownership of like basically of her own body and kind of like uses that to defeat Orlok in a rather like weirdly grotesque way. Like it felt more like it felt a little bit like it was coming out more of like a Cronenberg film at times with like the way they were shooting like that final scene. But yeah, there's a lot to love about this film. I could gush about like all the stuff that Robert Eggers does best, but if you're familiar with his work, you can probably guess what he would do with this type of vampire film, but also the fact that he has the guts to lean into it. And just like the way that he shoots the film with like the harsh blues and the shadows and like the ease of the transitioning and the spooky atmosphere and just not shying away from like the existential dread or the psychosexual angles, just evoking all those elements of classic vampire stories and just amping them up with like the more like a grander psychological level to explore. It's what Eggers does best, and that's why I really, really, really love the hell out of Robert Eggers' Nosferatu. I had a feeling I would, but it still surprised me in the end.